in that, and I hope perhaps through our presentations today you'll get a greater sense of what that means to be on the front lines.
Well, I'm a former county commissioner.
Oh, there you go. Thank you, this committee, for asking us to come today and share from our personal experiences in our counties. Bastrop County is currently under 3 natural disaster declarations, 2 fires and a flood. We are checking with Guinness to see if that might be a world record for a county of our size. We're also looking out for locusts and hailstones. We've already talked about the frogs, the Houston toad that inhabits our county, so we're already aware of that plague as well.
I'm surprised they moved. I'm sorry.
I'll tell you that our notoriety is not one that anyone wants to be suffering under 3 current natural disasters and then still recovering from the big 2011 fire, one of the most disastrous in state history. I'm here today to share our story a little bit about what it means on the front lines, and to ask for more state funding for all supporting state agencies, those that you've heard from today and others, and for counties and cities who are your political subdivision out there doing the work. It's encouraging to me to hear your line of questioning today, and to see that your interest and commitment and dedication to plowing through and removing the impediments that stand in the way of disaster recovery and response. I wanted to say to Senator Garcia particularly, she asked about some of those impediments. From my experience, I think you could list environmental assessment as a big one, procurement rules, which have already been discussed here this morning, as a huge one, staffing needs, particularly on a local level, small rural counties and cities particularly, and then the sequencing of recovery. Just for example, we received some funds to rebuild some roads that were destroyed during the 2011 fire. But it makes no sense to rebuild those roads until you're finished cleaning up the mess, hauling off the tonnage of the debris, and removing the trees that are dangerous and about to fall on the public. So you can't start some of these projects until the sequence is right. So that's part of the delay. You've already recognized the 3 distinct parts of dealing with natural disasters, that is preparedness and response and recovery, or Senator Lucio, reconstruction as you called it. Regarding preparedness, the state, it's my understanding that the state, and I think Chief Kidd just mentioned it, puts aside about $5 million each year for planning, exercising, and training of staff to be ready to meet disasters. Now, if you think about it, the state operates under about $100 billion a year budget. Is that right, Senator? Yes, ma'am. I think it's $200 billion for the biennium. So about $100 billion a year. That is less than a rounding error in calculating the state budget. $5 million a year is just not enough. In order to help us be better prepared, all state agencies supporting disasters need more funding for staff and for training, for mitigation. I do want to express my appreciation to HUD and to the GLO, the state agency managing those HUD's funds, for the opportunities that we have for resiliency funding and housing support. We could talk longer about some of the problems with all of that, but we're not here to belabor that, just to say thank you for the extra help that we get, particularly out of the federal government. Most state TDM funds go to response. A kid mentioned that. That means putting out the fire and rescuing victims of the flood. It's estimated that the Bastrop County Complex fire, the 2011 fire, cost the federal and state government about $50 million to fight and extinguish. Now, it's not yet known what the Hidden Pines fire of this year will cost, but it will be in the millions. This includes air support, Texas Forest Service dozers and firefighters, federal Blue Team incident management staff, other resources that help us fight and put out the fire. And I'm thankful for that. By the way, local governments can't afford to keep the assets and resources required to do that work. That really is a state responsibility, and we're thankful for the support that we get. It's very expensive to do that. One trip of that very large air tanker you saw fly over and drop that pink stuff, $50,000 for one trip. And it came several days into the fire after the 64 homes had already burned. All right? I'm just saying that it's very frustrating for us to be on the front lines of fighting a fire, knowing that we can't get the best, the most effective tools in here to fight that fire because they're stuck in California or Chattanooga, Tennessee, or somewhere else around the country, and the price tag to get them here is huge. The Texas has got to be better prepared to defend its citizens against disaster by having more of those resources locally and by making them available to the county judges more quickly so that we can get a better result. Chinook and Black Hawk helicopters cost about $1,000 an hour to operate, and in a forest fire like we just had, it may take hundreds or thousands of drops to cool the fire down enough so that ground crews can fight it on the ground. Those are kinds of resources that we locally just simply cannot have. The state can have those resources, and we're just asking that you make them available to us very aggressively in order to stop the fires before they do more damage. I need some of those assets stationed in Bastrop County. We've not only had the two fires that we've talked about, but in 2009 we had the Wilderness Ridge fire, which burned about 1,600 acres and destroyed about 35 homes. Just in the last 6 years, we've had 3 major fires in Bastrop County. When are we going to wake up and realize that we've got a problem here? The thing about it is that we are the lost pines of Texas, as you well know. The pine forest of central Bastrop County is separated from the East Texas pines by about 100 miles. So because of the subsoils and topography and ecosystem, those pines grow there. But it takes a special kind of pine to grow there. We're 100 miles removed from the East Texas forest, where there's generally more rain. We're right on the edge of West Texas, where we suffer drought. In fact, the Hidden Pines fire of this year was on the heels of a record 7-year drought, and it was only extinguished by a 10-inch rain that started the Halloween weekend floods. It's crazy. And so why can't we get more support in the hot spots? I like Chief Kidd's, I want to see his hotspot map. I bet you Bastrop County has a bullseye on it, just like Galveston will. That's where the problem is. Let's put the resources where we know by experience that the problems already exist. So that's response. And my time. I'm sorry, I've got so much to say. The next big part of disaster is recovery, and we could talk a long time about that. Federal recovery help may include individual assistance and public assistance. Both of these require damage assessments before the funds can be requested. And as of now, the state depends generally upon local governments, us, to do those damage assessments. One thing we need from the state is more support, and I'm thankful that Mr. Kidd has a greater staff available, but we need boots on the ground, clipboards in hand, going out and assessing the damages, both of individual damages and public damages, so that we can get our request in for assistance more quickly. It will cut down on the lag time between disaster and recovery. Timing is also critical for citizens and communities facing natural disasters. It's frustrating for our citizens whose homes are burned in the Hidden Pines fire to not know for weeks whether they're going to get any federal assistance through FEMA. They can't make any decisions. They're living with grandma or a brother-in-law. Their kids are displaced from their schools. We actually had schools busing kids halfway across the county to keep them in their regular classrooms. But it's extremely frustrating, the delay between the disaster and knowing whether or not we're going to get federal assistance. And knowing that is all dependent upon that assessment and reaching those thresholds that Chief Kidd talked about. The Hidden Pines fire did not reach those thresholds, and so locally we are responsible for cleaning up after that fire and providing housing for the people who lost their homes. That's all on us. Federal government's not going to be here to help us. And the state does not have its own public assistance and an individual assistance program that we can turn to when we don't qualify for federal funds. I'd like to plant the seed today that maybe this committee could encourage our legislature to step up and do the thing that Texas needs. I believe there are a couple of states in the union that do that. I think Florida does it and California does it. Has a state-funded individual and public assistance program. That may be something that would really be a help for those of us in the local government. We are working with our long-term recovery team to find funding to rebuild the homes that were lost in the Hidden Pines fire, for which we're not getting any help. Another need of local governments is for help in funding with the local match that's required for federal assistance. Except in the rarest of cases, all this FEMA money comes requiring a local match, 25%. Tax-limited counties have it very difficult to attain that kind of money. And I'll just give you a very brief story about what happened in 2011. FEMA came to town and said it's going to cost about $20 million just to clean up this mess. Get rid of the fire debris, bust up those slabs, cut down the trees that are dangerous, and just clean up Bastrop County. $20 million. We'll be glad to give you $15 million of that if you folks can come up with the other $5. Look, there was no way in the world Bastrop County could come up with the other $5. We didn't have that money, and we didn't have any way of getting it. After a few strategically placed phone calls and visits, the Lower Colorado River Authority gave Bastrop County a gift of $5 million. Without that money, we could not have accepted the $15 million of federal help to clean up our mess. And I'm thankful for their commitment to do that. Perhaps that should be the state's role for local communities, not having to depend upon local river authorities, and thank God for their generosity. I'm just saying that maybe the state needs to belly up to the bar and do the right thing by these local communities so that we get some help with that match. And beyond that, the continuing help, some of it requires matches as well. And small, limited funding local governments find it very difficult to raise the kinds of money that we may need for the match. After the 2011 fire, we came to the legislature, and I can thankfully tell you that through the work of Senator Watson and the governor's office and Tatum and others, we were appropriated an additional $4.9 million from the legislature to continue the recovery and cleanup efforts. And we're working as fast as we can, Senator Garcia, to spend that money, and we talked about some of the impediments to that, but we're working to spend that money to get Bastrop County back up and running pre-fire conditions. Thank you for that funding. Thank the legislature for that funding. That's what we need, and we need more of that. That's, I think, a good model. Let me summarize with these 4 points. We need more funding for TDM to provide personnel and assessments of suffering communities. We need more aggressive disaster mitigation. I haven't had time to talk much about mitigation, but look, if we can keep these things from happening, it's a lot cheaper than having to put out the fires and recover from them later on. We've already talked about the $50 million that was spent by governments to put out the Hidden Pines fire. $300 million was lost in insurable losses. If there had been a way that we and the State Parks Division had money to do fire mitigation, maybe that fire could have been contained to a few hundred acres and much less loss, and that would have been the best investment Texas could have ever made. Third thing I want to say is that we'd like to have more funding support for state agencies, and I certainly don't want to throw my friend Carter Smith under the bus today, but Parks and Wildlife needs more help so that they can do their own fire mitigation in state park property. Both of the major state fires in Bastrop County that destroyed so many homes were affected by state parks. Bastrop State Park in the 2011 fire, Bisher State Park in this recent fire. When the fire gets into those state parks where there hasn't been money to do fire mitigation for decades, it's beyond anybody's control. You can't stop it, you can't fight it. You just wait for the wind to quit blowing. That's all you can do. The state park can do better than that. And as a state agency, ought to be leading the way in fire mitigation work so that we don't put homes and science research parks, such as that wonderful facility at Smithville, in such jeopardy. And finally, local jurisdictions need help in meeting that match that's required, particularly for federal funding, FEMA funding. that's something that the state can certainly help us with. So I've tried to outline some challenges faced by your local governments on the front lines of disaster response and recovery, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that I could.
Judge, I personally want to thank you for your passion and your commitment to being what we call a public servant. We're honored to have Senator Kirk Watson here. We just walked in a little while ago. He heard your testimony, and I'm glad he did, because
he's the gentleman that's apparently trying out at Macy's for the part of Santa Claus. Now, if he had my figure in his beard, he'd be a winner.
I just want to tell you that he has that same passion as he speaks out in your behalf and behalf of many others, especially here in this area of the state. But we thank you very much. As you were speaking, obviously you brought up some very, very good points in terms of making sure that we have the necessary team that can address that. Texas should have an A team through its forestry department or Parks and Wildlife, or create an agency that dedicates itself totally to natural disasters all over the state and responds appropriately to those disasters, man-made or natural. But I certainly want to thank you for, again, your excellent testimony. I would like very much, if you do have a written testimony, to share it with us so we can make it part of our hearing here today. Any questions, members?
Quick
Senator, that's Chairman Betancourt.
Okay, thank you, Judge. You made some really good points, so I'm glad to hear that you'll provide it in written testimony. And the point that I think you make is absolutely, 100% rock solid, is the state parks have not done any fire remediation, and we're still in this idea that fires shouldn't occur at all. And unfortunately, they are natural parts of the process. And you're right, when the county has two of them that are in a fire-heavy area, because you're right, you've got topography and specific loblolly pine and all the problems that you've got. It's really important point that we look at making Parks and Recs take a look at doing fire remediation. And also, I'm curious why Colorado River Authority had the extra $5 million. Happy that you got it, but wondering how all that occurred. Okay.
Well,
I figured Santa Claus had something to do with it. In the back.
Part of the reason is standing in the back of the room.
That's right. Well, I'll see him after class, so I'll find out what really happened. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Judge. And when you talk about the 3 fires in 5 years, I mean, is that an anomaly, or have you had fires spread throughout the time, or is this just all of a sudden we've had these?
That's a great question. Actually, I've lived in Bastrop County 32 years, and I mentioned the 3 major fires that have happened in Bastrop County just in the last 6 years. It may be that we're at the end of a 7-year drought. It may be that we have more people living in Bastrop County now than ever before. But none of those fires, at least by the investigations, were started intentionally by people. This last one was a farming accident with a shredder.
Light sparks that caused the fire.
Yes, it started the fire. 2011 fire, I think the final result of that was a tree fell on a power line, actually in a couple of different places on the same day. The 2009 fire, again, my understanding of that investigation is that it was a tree falling on a power line. So the fact is that we live in an environment that is just volatile, and we've got to be better prepared. We've got some things we need to do, and we're doing them, and we'll continue to work on that. But we just have to realize the reality of where we live.
So the things you're doing, you're talking about mitigating.
Yes, sir. We have a very
that would
aggressive
include
mitigation.
fire breaks.
It would, yes, sir. Along the
out
power
the
lines. Yes, sir. Along the public right-of-ways, getting trees out of the public right-of-way. Everybody loves a pine tree. I love them. But it doesn't make sense to let them grow in the right-of-way. They're dangerous for drivers. And secondly, that prevents us from having a fire break along the highways and county roads. So we're actively moving those out of the right-of-ways so that we'll at least be able to get our equipment in there to fight.
Because, I mean, fire breaks, I think 71 would normally be a pretty good fire break, but it jumped 71.
Yes, it did. We've learned from these fires that, the embers, glowing embers can fly a quarter mile through the air. It jumped not only 71, but it also jumped the Colorado River, and went into some ranch land south of the river. So the best way to fight a forest fire is just to prevent it from happening.
Yeah. Well, speaking of fighting a forest fire, you said $50,000 per plane load of that pink stuff.
Yes, sir.
How many acres does that pink stuff cover?
Well, I can't tell you exactly that. I know that they made 4 short runs. Each of those runs covered about a mile. So let's say 4 miles, 100 feet wide. What's that, 20,000
Yeah, but it puts
feet.
the fire out where it hits. I mean, it's pretty effective.
It doesn't actually put the fire out so much as it keeps other fuel from burning. So
you go ahead and advance the
yes,
fire.
it knocks the fire down so that the firefighters can get on the ground and fight it. Yes, sir.
And then, I'm sorry, just real quick, one thing. You said about slabs being replaced. So when you have a fire like that, they have to replace the concrete slab?
Yes, sir. Most insurance companies will not insure homes that are built on burned out slabs.
So does the insurance company cover it when the catches on fire? And
It's part of for those who had insurance, it's part of their coverage. The cost of removing the old slab and putting in a new one would be covered with that.
Now, in your case, I think you said you'd replace like 30 homes or something. That was said earlier. One fire was that they actually weren't insured. We actually had to help from the state with 30 some odd houses.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me about that, because that was HUD funds, and they came to town and actually had a lot of money, $15 million available for replacing local housing. We had about 160 families that had no insurance, couldn't rebuild. Out of that 160 families, only 35 of them qualified for the HUD funding. There are lots of hoops to jump through when you're qualifying for federal funding, and most of the families couldn't qualify. They didn't have enough income to handle the taxes and insurance that would be due on the home if they got a new home. We actually had one lady who was given a new home and within 2 years had to sell it because she couldn't afford to pay the taxes, utilities, and insurance on the house. So the federal program works if the citizen is not in such poverty that they can't support the house. We have a local organization called the Long-Term Recovery Team, which built 130 houses for those who were uninsured or underinsured with private donated funds to buy the materials, and faith-based organizations providing all of the labor. It was an amazing sight. And they're back now to help us with this Hidden Pines fire. But it's a great partnership, not only government, but private sector, faith-based organizations. Everybody has to work out when there's a local disaster such as we've had in Bastrop County.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you being here, and sorry for the difficulties you've had in your county.
Thank you.
Looking back a couple of sessions ago, one of the things that I brought to the table was my concern of pricing up people from their new homes, and in terms of the taxes that they would not be able to afford. You remember that discussion, and
yes,
it was back then Senator Glenn Hager who helped a lot at that point, along with the rest of my colleagues, to make sure we had legislation passed that would ensure that those people would pay the same amount of taxes on their new homes that they were paying in the homes they were living in. It wouldn't be fair for us to build a home, rebuild our homes, and then charge them higher taxes. So I'm very pleased that the legislature did the right thing. I just want you to know, Judge, and everyone here, that we've been looking at some of the best practices from across the nation of the resources that other states provide to their communities when their disaster events do not qualify for federal assistance. That is why I'm very thankful. I really am, that Governor Patrick has provided us with this disaster recovery charge. With the leadership of this committee, and you've heard them today, all of them are engaged. We will hopefully work to develop the right reforms and initiatives to better help victims and communities of natural disasters and man-made disasters in Texas. We are one Texas, and that's why I've always advocated when it comes to, insurance. We should the whole state should participate, and not just the coastal areas. To make sure that their areas are insured. So, with that, I want to thank you, Judge, and you're well represented.
Yes, sir.
But you have.
He's speaking for himself.
No, I'm speaking for his senator. You're well represented, and I'm sure that the rest of us will certainly be listening carefully to what you have to say. Doctor, Judge, thank you.